Welcome, everyone. My name is Michael Goldberg. For folks who do not know me, I'm our executive director for the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship here at the university, and also I'm a professor at Weatherhead. And it's such a pleasure to welcome back to Cleveland and campus, Michael and Lizzie Horvitz. Michael and I met actually when I first was moving back to Cleveland and was getting involved in this strange new adventure for me of venture capital. So we had an early conversation. We were introduced by my dad. And then as we reconnected, and Michael has been involved with the university for a long time, and we're talking about some of the things that we were doing on campus, he told me about Lizzie and the work that she was doing with her new startup. And we thought it'd be fun to have an intergenerational conversation about access to capital and starting new companies. And so Michael and Lizzie, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. This is our first father-daughter program.
It is.
Awesome.
Well, maybe our first and only.
Exactly. We're going to take it, it's like when Hamilton opened on Broadway, no one knew, and exactly. What happened. Exactly. And we're thrilled to have Amy as our student moderator. Amy is are you rising senior?
Yeah.
Rising senior. And we've gotten to know Amy both as a student in our entrepreneurship class and also as a Veale Institute intern this summer. So like with all of our sessions, we love having these interactive. We've got a great group here on Zoom and also watching on LinkedIn Live. So just let Amy know in the chat or raise your hand if you want to jump in for a question. If you're watching on LinkedIn Live, just post in the comment and we'll make sure that Amy sees it. So with that, over to you, Amy.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction. Hi, everyone. As Michael said, my name is Amy, and I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. I'm super excited to introduce both Michael Horvitz and Lizzie Horvitz. Michael's the chairman at Parkland Management, which is an investment management firm, and Lizzie is the founder and CEO of Finch Insights, which is a startup which educates people all about sustainability. So like Michael said as well, if you have any questions, please feel free to either put your question in the chat or use the raise hand function and I can call on you. You can introduce yourselves and you can ask your question. So let's get started. The first question I really want to kick us off with is if both you, Michael and Lizzie, could sort of introduce yourselves, explain your journey through your career and sort of where you are right now.
Lizzie?
I'll kick it off. Great. Well, thanks so much, Amy, again, for moderating this and for being here. I have been in the sustainability space for my entire career. I became really passionate about it when I was 16 and have really dedicated my life since then to climate mitigation in the private sector. And so after graduating from college, I worked at a nonprofit for a couple of years in the environmental space. And then I realized that I believe that the biggest problems in the world will be solved in the private sector, whether we like it or not. And so went to go get my MBA and my master's in environmental management. That took me to Unilever, where I worked on their supply chain team and then on their sustainability team, helping integrate the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan into our 38 brands in North America. And while I was at Unilever, something interesting started happening in my personal life where I began getting a ton of questions from family and friends who didn't have a background in sustainability on the small changes that they could make or any confusion that they had. So questions around what exactly is a paraben, or I just had a baby, which diaper should I be buying that doesn't, kill the planet, et cetera. And I realized the content online was incredibly difficult to sift through because you had these wonky academic papers, which aren't meant for normal people to read. And then on the other side, you have this rise of bloggers who are incredibly well-intentioned, but not really speaking in science or in data. And so I started a newsletter just aiming to distill this type of information. Meanwhile, had left Unilever to go work for a startup and fell in love with entrepreneurship, taking a company from inception to scale. I totally drank the Kool-Aid and realized that this newsletter could really become a full-time opportunity. And so that started in March of 2020, right at the beginning of COVID. And we're basically a platform now that decodes products, environmental and social impacts, and incentivizes consumers to make better purchasing decisions. And that's where we are now.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
So I'm much more boring after listening to that. I practiced law in Cleveland with Jones Day for a little more than 30 years. My practice was in the business and tax area, and in the course of that, I represented a number of private equity firms, entrepreneurial companies, private businesses, family businesses, and gained had a lot of entrepreneurs as my clients. And of course, you always love your clients, right? So I love entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs, and have hung around the investing space, the challenges in raising capital, the challenges in moving from one stage of a business to another stage, and also as you get way down the road, the trauma of selling your company and what that means. So I've seen a lot of that in the 30 years I've been practicing, and I have probably not conveyed enough of it or much of it to Lizzie, who's figured this out all by herself. So that's I give her a lot of credit for that. Some very tough issues in entrepreneurship.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for sharing that. And Lizzie, this question is more geared towards you, but since you have created a startup, I was wondering if you could touch on, investing and what you have found works best for you. So, kind of comparing them, what you found was the most successful or kind of the least successful.
Absolutely. I have a lot of thoughts on this, as you know, Amy. I got very good advice early on that said that your first round, when you go out to institutional investors or even friends and family angels, you should get as far as possible. And so I found that instead of going to a lot of people saying, I have this great idea, help me build it, I wanted to build as much as I could first, and then go out for funding. And it's not lost on me that that's an incredibly privileged position to be in. I was able to take to set aside $200,000 of my own money to invest in Finch. And that sort of took us through the first really year, where we were able to build a beautiful website and build, wireframes for our product and a lot of other sort of assets that really helped sell. And so then I went out to raise a pre-seed round. I personally am not super involved in the venture capital world. I don't know much about it except for my own experience. But what I did see happening was people are getting very specific on these different rounds. There's pre-seed, there's seed, there's Series A, but it's kind of just your first round, your second round. It doesn't really matter. But I was given good advice that if I was trying to raise $1 million, given where we were, pre-seed made sense. And I went out to friends and family and angels and spoke to a massive amount of VCs. So for 2 months, it was basically my full-time job. I stepped away from really the business and my part-time employees and my one full-time employee really helped, hold down the fort while I was having all these investor calls. And I just spoke to everybody and anybody. And someone said in the beginning, you're going to speak to probably 200 people after this is all done. And that's not because you're going to get so many no's. It's because every single time you're on the phone with somebody, they'll say, I think you should speak to this other colleague of mine, or this other person you would find interesting. And that rang to be very, very true. It sort of just grew out of probably a list of 30 turned into probably 300 conversations that I had. I had a really good experience with angels. I think there are a lot of strategic angels who just do this either full-time or on the side as a hobby, and they love getting involved. They're always available to talk. And I've found that they're a little bit more flexible on these rigid metrics that people need to make. So a lot of VCs that you talk to will want to see, $100 million of revenue within the first 5 years. And that's just, it's impossible I would have to really tweak my financial model to make it look like that. And it wouldn't mean anything. So angels were just much more comforting. They're sort of, I think the word comes from really these people on your shoulder helping you with whatever you need at the time. And that's absolutely the case. I found the venture capital searching to be incredibly frustrating, to be candid. I think they don't always have the best intentions. They wasted a lot of time for me. I was incredibly busy during this time, and I found that they they weren't respectful of that. And I did not get the sense, a lot of them say, we're founders first, we're supportive, et cetera. I didn't find that in most of my conversations, to be completely honest. I hope that changes when I didn't end up getting any VC funding. And so, I'll do that again in my seed round in a year, but those were sort of my initial thoughts. And then I also tried to sort of infiltrate the family office scene, and that was also unsuccessful. I'm not sure why or if there's any particular reason for that. But yeah, angels were sort of my best experience thus far.
Awesome, thank you. It's so interesting to hear kind of about VCs versus angels and all that. So thank you for sharing that. Now, Michael, to you for a question. From an investor's standpoint, what do you view as the best type of companies to invest in? And sort of what are you looking for when you're sort of figuring out which ones to go with?
So this is probably not what Lizzie's going to want to hear on this, but and I would say, I think, Lizzie, isn't it right that while you didn't have great success with venture capital firms, you did have some success with individuals in those firms who were interested in what you were doing, but who didn't feel that it was right at the right time for their firm itself?
So I spoke to probably 50 venture capital firms. One of them ended up investing as an angel. He said, "You're too early for the firm, but I'm interested as an angel." So that was one case. All of them, I would say 90% of them came back to me when I got that rejection saying, "We're not going to invest at this time." Most of them said, "You're too early." But honestly, I'm not sure whether that's a really easy excuse or if they actually will be interested in the seed round. I think only time will tell that.
It's hard to know. So from my standpoint, I would say that in venture investing, and I would also put the terminology. Sometimes people talk about private equity, sometimes people talk about venture or buyouts, but I'd lump them all together in a private equity category for purposes of this discussion. And I'd say there's two secrets to private equity investing. One secret is diversification. You can't, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're interested in backing a particular business, if you're having fun doing it, you can do that. You can invest in, you find a little business and back the person who's trying to get it started or who's running it. That's fine. But if you're going to have an organized private equity investment program, you need to be diversified. You can't just invest in one company. Every company that you look at is going to have a business plan that looks like it's going to have great success. And the fact is that in many of these firms, if they make 10 investments, only 2 of them or maybe 3 of them will be really successful, and the rest will either plod along or go out of business. Venture capital is based on the premise that that you can only lose 100% of your money, but you can make a lot more than that. So if you have 2 or 3 investments out of 10 that do really well, you can make up for all the losses in the other companies. And I can't think of another field except possibly baseball where if you have only a 20 or 30% success rate, you're among the best in the world. If you have a 300 batting average of 300, you're doing pretty well. But that's only a third of 30% of the time. The 60, 70% of the time you're striking out. So you have to be diversified to be successful. That's number one. Number two, you have to be actively involved. You can't just say, "Here's my money, call me when I can retire or buy my yacht," or whatever it is that you want to do. So you have to be involved. You have to be on the board. You have to mentor the people who you're investing with. And what all that means, the mentoring, the being involved, the need for diversification is to be successful, you need to have a large base of capital, and you need to have time to mentor these investors. and not everybody has that. And so I find that investing in funds, which raise lots of money, and you're a small part of it, but they raise lots of money, and they have people working for those funds whose job it is to work the investments. And so it's very, for me, it's very hard to have somebody who just comes and says, I'm starting this great company, aren't you interested in it? But it is better. You can get much more diversification, and you can get access to some really good investors if you go through funds. So that's sort of my bias on that. I know it took a long time to answer that question, but there it is.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's so interesting to hear. Before I continue with some more questions, I just want to remind the audience and ask if anyone else has any other questions. Again, feel free to put it in the chat or use the raise hand function, and I can call on you if you have any. But I know, Michael, you had a question that you were wanting to ask.
Michael G, not Michael H. Thanks. Yeah, and we do look forward to your questions. So please, love to have more audience participation in this great discussion. The topic of sort of social impact investing, kind of from where it started, maybe Michael, kind of maybe early in the days, maybe you wouldn't see entrepreneurs like Lizzie that are not only trying to make money with a business that has a compelling value proposition, but is also trying to do some good in the world. I'm sort of curious in both of your perspectives, maybe Lizzie start, like as an entrepreneur sort of going out to the market where you're doing good in the world and trying to make money, how does that sort of incorporate in your pitch? Because you're not attacking this problem as a nonprofit organization, you're attacking it as an entrepreneur and as a business owner. So I'm curious how you balance the making money piece with doing good in the world. And then Michael, to follow up to you, when you think about the investor side of things, how has social impact or having a social impact, you think, resonated with the investor community? So maybe Lizzie, you first.
It's a really important question. I think that I feel strongly that business always comes first, not at the risk of social or environmental issues, but you really need to make the case for the business model. I thought about this for a long time before I was an entrepreneur at Unilever. I think people, Ben & Jerry's is probably a bad example right now. They're getting a lot of press today, but a lot of people buy Ben & Jerry's because it's the best ice cream, not because they're social and environmental advocates. Same with Patagonia, same with Allbirds. And so I think the success of a real true company is when people want to use your product despite all of the environmental benefits, and that's more icing on the cake. I think also in the ESG realm, and my dad can probably speak more to this, companies that are socially responsible are outperforming companies that are not. And we're very strongly moving in that connection where, when I think back to my investor conversations, they were sort of put in two buckets. There was, a group of venture capital firms that only invested in climate technology and other sustainability companies. There were also every single VC firm that's traditional who wants to dip their toe in the sustainability space. If you're not a part of that movement, you're missing out on something. So I'm seeing that both on the investor side. And then also, when I started this company in March, I couldn't believe how genius I was. I was like, I can't believe no one's thought of this before. And actually, it turns out a ton of people have tried this, but are actually, there's almost a new company like Finch popping up at least every week that I'm seeing. And so it's becoming more and more popular, I think, but it's a double-edged sword. Not to go too much on a tangent. It's interesting because there's a lot of people like me who have been in this space forever. But there are also a lot of people who are coming into this for the very first time, who are, brand managers or accountants or lawyers who now just want to shift their energy using their skills, but towards sustainability and social impact. And I think that's a really exciting movement that's happening. We need all the people that we can get.
Well, I think that it's here to stay. It's not a fad. There was a time when people thought that in order to be a socially responsible investor, you had to sacrifice return. I think that's really not the case anymore. I think most people understand that. And I think most people see the value of it. There's some things that are very obvious. So, for example, diversity and inclusion. There's no question that you get better decision making if you have people in the room who've had different life experiences and have different perspectives on things. If everybody went to the same school, belongs to the same club, you don't get that quality of discussion and decision making. So there, it's a no-brainer. You want to deal with companies where they have high quality decision making, whether it's diversity on their board or diversity in their leadership team, or however you want to define it. There are other things that are not so clear in what they call the ESG space. The ESG is environmental, social, and governance. How do you define what's a good company in these days? Is it are you by definition a bad company if you make alcohol, or if you provide you're a healthcare institution that provides contraception services or things like that? Everybody has their own idea of their own values and what they want to see. A company that has a very, very heavily unionized workforce, is that a good thing, or is that a drag on their returns? It's very hard to know, and different people have different perspectives on that. So in the core, you can sort of get to some basic ideas, but I think the further out you go, the tougher it is. A lot of people have said that, one of the reasons that the ESG portfolios did so well is because energy did so badly. Energy was really a lousy sector for a number of years. The prices are now coming up, but for a number of years it was pretty bad. And all the people who were into the socially responsible or the ESG investing, they didn't want any energy in their, any carbon-based companies in their portfolio. So they avoided the worst sector of the market, and they outperformed everybody. So that was great. Whether it means that ESG, is better, or whether it was just a sort of a timing thing, it's very hard to know. But I think it's here to stay. I'm on a number of investment committees that are very focused on ESG. And, they have questionnaires that they send to their money managers, and we want to know about your diversity, and we want to know about, what you're doing. The other thing is this negative positive equation, where to some people, it's just avoiding the things you don't like. I don't want any gambling stocks. I don't want any alcohol. I don't want energy, carbon extraction. And then there's the other people who are, I guess you would call them impact investors. They're not as focused on all the bad stuff. What they're doing is they're saying, I want to do something that's going to make the world a better place, and hopefully that I can make a lot of money at too. I think impact investing is going to become much more popular, and the exclusionary portfolios are going to be less popular over time.
Awesome, thank you. It seems like we have an audience member who has a question. Doug, if you'd like to unmute and introduce yourself and ask your question.
Sure, and I had a question for Lizzie. I like the business concept. I'm questioning the competitive landscape that you're playing in, and what hits me is the barriers for entry seem pretty low for this type of business. And how are you dealing with some of that going forward?
It's a really good question, Doug. We have done a lot of research on who we're competing with. I think the first thing I'll say is that it's not lost on us that there's really only one company like ours that will succeed. I don't think there will ever be a time when people will be downloading multiple browser extensions on their desktop or, going to a variety of websites for sustainability insights. That's sort of the point of Finch, is that we want to become that one source. But that said, the more people that are doing this and the more attention it gets, I think the better it is for all of us. We separate ourselves by a couple of factors. The first is the accessibility of our users. So there are a lot of competitors who are going after the hyper green customer who, is making their own homemade detergent in the bathtub and not flying anymore and not using takeout, et cetera. And that's great for them. That's not what Finch is all about. Finch is trying to reach the 50 to 65% of the population who cares about climate change, doesn't want to be part of the problem, but is not really willing to spend more than 7 minutes online researching what they need or change their life in a real fundamental way. So we think we can capture that wider audience and hopefully have a bigger impact, because those hyper green people are going to get to the answer anyway. The other real difference is in carbon offsets. So a lot of our competitors are providing products that say, tell us what you're doing every day, or we'll follow the way that you shop online and we will offset that. So you can pay an extra $2 to $4 and we'll plant a tree, or we'll, do something else. I don't have faith in the carbon offset market really at all, but particularly not in the consumer space. I don't think it's mature enough to prove that when you're planting a tree, there's not another one that might not get cut down in 50 years, but also you can't really protect against a fire burning down that tree or anything like that could naturally happen, in which case you're sort of doing double the damage. The other big problem with offsets is, again, with the accessibility, but in a different way, there's a massive population of people who can't afford to spend an extra $2 to reduce their footprint, and who are really living paycheck to paycheck. Those people are not less concerned about sustainability. In fact, in many cases, they're more concerned than the upper middle class community. And so I think that you go down a dangerous path of saying, to be fully sustainable, you have to be of a certain socioeconomic status, et cetera. So Finch actually, we think, is tackling that middle ground. And we also have this content hub where none of these other products are providing information on, if you want to know if you can recycle a specific thing in Cleveland, Ohio, where are you going to go for that information? And Finch is well positioned to take that space. Yeah, I think that's it right now. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you for the question, Doug. That was great. And thank you for the answer, Lizzie. Michael, I have a question for you now. I was wondering, if you could touch on sort of the difference. You've worked with a lot of like big and small companies. If you could sort of touch on those and, who you found you like working better with, what's the difference sort of between big and small companies that you've sort of seen?
Well, I'm not sure that big and small is necessarily the right category, but I do think there are different stages businesses go through. I think the skills, the drive you need to start a business, to be a real entrepreneur and really get it off the ground are very unique. And people who have those skills, who have, if I were to generalize, and I don't like to do that because a lot of the characteristics I'm going to describe do not describe my daughter. But sometimes they're impulsive. Sometimes they don't have patience for meetings and bureaucracy. They want to just go out and get stuff done and so forth. And that works great when you're a very small company. But as you get bigger, as you have to have systems, as you have to have a human resources person, and you have to hire a lawyer and all that stuff, some people can't make the switch, and so you go through different phases. And some people have the ability to get the thing off the ground, but not the ability to take it then to the next level or to become public or to have partners. A lot of people are sort of loners, and they like being loners. And having partners is a whole different animal, you know. So, and then when you get really big, when you become a big public company, you are much more bureaucratic. You have a lot more difficult ways to make decisions. You have a lot more meetings. You have, you know, a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't like. In my law practice, I liked representing people for whom the issues I was dealing with were very important, personally important. So if somebody started a business and it's like their baby, you know, and the decisions you're making, especially if there's a complicated, tough problem, these are really important personally to the people at the company. And so I really like dealing with those people and helping them solve problems that were important to them. I did not like working for very big companies that had general counsels who would call you up and say, I need to know how Rule 304C works in the context of this little problem, you know, and then you're answering a legal question. But the person who's calling you doesn't really care about the answer. They may have, you know, if they're working on a transaction and it works out well, they may get a bigger bonus than they otherwise would have. They don't have that personal stake in what's going on. So I loved dealing with people for whom the things we were dealing with were really personally important. I found it very satisfying. Sometimes, you know, my wife didn't find it that satisfying because sometimes they call you at home and all hours of the day and night, and they have all these issues and stuff like that. But I think overall, I enjoyed it much more. Lizzie's had experience working in both, you know, both environments, and I think she would tell you that there's pluses and minuses of each.
Mhm.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that's absolutely true. There are pros and cons, but I really appreciate the smaller sort of startup environment much more than the large company one.
Awesome. It seems like Ishan has a question. So Ishan, if you want to unmute, introduce yourself and ask away.
Sure. Give me a sec. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Ishan, and I recently started with my startup Ethiclick, which is, you know, a platform that creates, you know, browser extension, mobile app, and a website that, you know, helps you find sustainable products and alternatives, and helps you, you know, figure out to what extent these products are sustainable and stuff. So my question is, when, you know, when Finch goes about searching for products, and, you know, they talk to companies or they partner with companies to find, you know, about this, you know, manufacturing and, you know, materials they're using. To what extent do you think the companies are honest about sharing those details about, you know, whether they're using the same correct material, and, you know, the energy consumption they're using, or the workers' condition and stuff? And how do you go about, you know, rating them, if that's makes sense?
I think it makes perfect sense. I think the honesty factor is a tricky one. And at first we had a rule that we would only use publicly available data. So we would scrape the internet and look at SEC filings, sustainability reports, press releases, because our feeling was that, you know, it's a lot harder to lie in a publicly facing statement than it is to, if we were just to say, fill out a survey and let us know how you feel. The other reason we did that was because I just knew from my experience at Unilever, most companies wouldn't spend the time, you know, Finch is a nobody to them right now. And so I don't think they'd be incredibly interested in taking the time it required to give us the information that we were looking for. So, you know, 99% of our information is publicly sourced. It's what's been interesting since we launched is that we've had companies coming to us proactively saying, you know, we're this new deodorant company. We'd love for you to rate us. Here's a bunch of information. And for that, we're still a very small team. So we still honestly encourage most of it to be publicly available unless we can vet it in some way. We also want to encourage companies to just be more transparent in the first place. So we've talked to, I believe overall, companies are not doing a lot of good things for the environment and not talking about it, right? You're not using organic cotton and keeping that a secret. So I think generally it hasn't been a problem. And for companies that are keeping it private, I just actually spoke to Nike and they said, we do so much behind the scenes that our customers don't know about, partly because we don't know how to communicate it. I have less sympathy for that because my feeling is the more transparent, the better for everybody. So every company kind of needs to figure out how to be more transparent. And that's ideally, in the perfect state, when Finch becomes very big, we can encourage these companies to be public about what they're doing. But tactically, we use machine learning to rate these products. And so we'll manually rate 10 to 20 products in a category, and do a lot of academic research to understand what factors go into those products. So for paper towels, for example, it would be, the risk of deforestation or runoff at the pulp mill, things like that. We'd read academic papers to understand how those factors play out and how we should weight them. And then we feed that into our machine learning model, which then scrapes at scale, all the paper towel products on Amazon and gives them each a score. It's absolutely not perfect yet, but we're getting there.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you for the question, Ashan. Darren, I see that your hand is up. If you want to unmute, introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Darren Small. Hi, Lizzie. Went from New York City, moving to Ohio in 3 days, actually. So I'm looking forward to being moving to Cleveland. I'm going to be taking my startup, which is Oko, peer-to-peer. It's really the business software as a service model, connecting buyers and sellers of physical commodities together on a platform. So Lizzie, I had a question for you. Good to see you today. Thank you for your talk. About customer acquisition, like how you're thinking about connecting with your customers as Finch grows. It's just maybe talk about more about the strategy or the model that you're looking to put in place to connect with your customers in the right places so they get the information that they need.
Sure. I can actually kill two birds with one stone because it looks like Melissa asked the top 3 questions VCs had. And the main question was absolutely customer acquisition. How are you going to make this go viral? Because for our business model, it requires everybody and their mom to download this extension. And so we think about that probably more than any other issue within the company. And I think it's a combination of things. First, it's building a community. It's doing research on who these people are, like who's willing to download the extension and how do we find them. So we did a lot of research very early on, probably September of last year, doing a lot of Facebook ads tests. And we have 3 key archetypes, one of whom is a new mom. She is a really good demographic for us for a variety of reasons that you're probably thinking of. One of the reasons I think is most interesting is that we all have brand loyalties, right? I use Bounty paper towels because that's what I grew up on, and I'm not really interested in switching brands. As a new mom, you have to look at all of these products for the very first time when you're pregnant. You've never done research on diapers or cribs or anything like that. So it's a really good opportunity for Finch to come in and help drive that decision. And so while we're not outwardly marketing to new moms because we don't want to, turn off anybody who's not, that is, I think, the core of what we're trying to do. So I'm spending time, as silly as it sounds, infiltrating Reddit mom groups and Facebook groups, Slack channels, and basically just saying, here's who we are. What do you guys want to see? I think the other research we saw was that users or people in general don't like just to be told what to do. They want to be a part of these solutions. And I think the way to do that is to let them be part of the conversation and say, we're building this, we're very early on. What would you like to see in this product? And what would be most helpful for you? Because the worst thing that we could do is build something that nobody wants to use. We'll get to the paid marketing, which there's really no replacement for that. That goes a really, really long way. If we can get partnerships with influencers and things like that, that's probably going to take us to the next level. But for right now, we're really focusing on organic growth and seeing who we can get to partner and amplify our voice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Darren, for asking the question. And just sort of to wrap up with the last question, I was wondering if you both could just provide some advice on students looking to either go into investing, to create their own startup. Just any advice, any experiences that you think that they should have before they sort of venture out into that.
I'll start. I feel very strongly that it's important to have experience before you do either of those things. I think there's a lot of movement towards people just coming out of college or business school and starting their own companies without ever having worked at a startup. I feel very strongly that you learn so much being under someone who's done this before. I would have never been able to start Finch or get this far had I not had that, year and a half experience at the other startup. And so I think that that is really important. And then with investing, I would say it's similar. I think my dad has really good points about how risky it can be, particularly as an angel, but to become involved, Sequoia and these other VCs have these communities of people where like scouts basically that look for cool companies. And so if you can be involved in that under the umbrella of a larger support network, I think that's a really good place to start. And then, there's no rush on this, right? I was 33 when I started this. I'd been out of college for 10 years, 32. And so I just think that that's important to keep in mind, that people can take their time with this, and amazing things happen when people are well experienced.
I don't know that I have much to add to that. I do think getting experience elsewhere is important. There are some highly celebrated examples of great success. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, who dropped out of college and started these businesses and then became phenomenally successful. It doesn't mean everybody should drop out of college. It doesn't mean that nobody should get a job someplace first. There's always exceptions to the rule, but I think for most people, seeing how a well-established business operates is very beneficial. And I would encourage people to do that. And it's not, if you're 25 when you start your company instead of being 22 or 20, in the scheme of things, I don't think that it changes things, and it could help a tremendous amount.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That's great advice to end on. Thank you again for taking the time to come today and talk to everyone. But I'm going to turn it back over to Michael G.
Great. Thanks, Amy, for moderating. You did a great job today. Michael and Lizzie, thank you so much for joining. I think the intergenerational dynamic, Michael H., my dad is on behind his, he's not on video, but I see him on. So I've got my own intergenerational thing going on this session today. But we really appreciated you guys joining us today. We do look forward to welcoming you back to Cleveland and to Case Western Reserve at some point soon. And for those joining today, I did put a link to future events that we have upcoming. And we are returning to campus. So we're going to be doing things both in person here in ThinkBox, but also streaming out events. Many of you are not based here in Cleveland, so we'll continue to welcome folks via Zoom and also on LinkedIn Live. So again, and there's my dad's face, Michael, so you can see him in person or see him via Zoom. Lizzie and Michael H., thank you so much for joining, and thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye-bye.